Welcome to Men's Sexual Mastery. This is your host, Ben Timby, joined by my fellow co-host and co-founder, Ian Hawks.
What's up, everybody? Good to have you here.
Yeah, good to have you all here. And today we're going to be diving into the topic of sexual empowerment, moving from sexual scarcity to sexual abundance. This is a topic that comes up often in the training program and in our cohorts. The past couple of weeks, there were some men who were sharing the dynamic that often comes up in many of our relationships with our partners, where they're coming with their desires, they're claiming their desires, they're being bold, they're building up their sexual energy, and their partner is oftentimes not meeting them in that. And she may be even closing to his advances. And, many men experience this pattern, especially after being in a relationship for an amount of time. There's the typical honeymoon phase that fades, and then gradually, the more and more time many men spend with their partners, the more and more closed off she may be to meeting him intimately and sexually. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to you, Hawks, and hear what you have to say about what the core issue may be for many men who are facing this pattern in their relationship.
Yeah, so when we talk about sexual empowerment, as you were saying, Ben, the shift into empowerment comes from a shift from scarcity into abundance. And so scarcity in sexual dynamics, to me, one of the roots of that in partnership is a desire gap. There is a difference in the level of desire that the man is feeling and the level of desire that the woman is feeling. And this gap, typically, it's the man seems to have more desire than the woman. The root of that problem itself, I think, comes down to the patterns that men have developed and the habits that have developed over time, the conditioning, really. And one of these common threads that we see with men in the program is the use of sex or ejaculation for nervous system regulation. Something we hear a lot of the time is, I jerk off before going to bed because it calms me down and then I can sleep. Or I get when I feel stress in my life, I turn to porn as a coping mechanism. If we're using sex or porn or ejaculation as a regulation tool, that is going to create a level of scarcity in us because stressors come up in life. The need to regulate our nervous system is real. And if we're turning to sex or porn for that regulation, then we're becoming beholden to that external stimulus. And when that shows up in relationship, the man is turning to his partner every time that he needs regulation. And this is very disempowering. And it creates a dynamic where the woman can also end up feeling used. If we're turning to our partner for intimacy, to regulate ourselves, rather than to generate more abundance of love and connection in the relationship, then there's a disconnect there that our partner's going to feel. And if there's been a pattern in a man's life for many years or decades of using porn to meet that need and masturbating and ejaculating to porn in a manner that's quick, that's dissociated from his body and from the real felt sense experience of pleasure and arousal in his system, and we're just looking at porn and experiencing this hyper arousal. Is the other side of this is porn actually creates a really heightened nervous system response where we're like spiking dopamine, adrenaline, and then there's an ejaculation and this crash. And so That pattern creates a dysfunction in the body sexually when we relate with another human, because our body has learned a self-soothing practice of hyperarousal, quick stimulation that then peaks and crashes. And that does not set a man up to meet his partner's desires.
Mm-hmm.
So that pattern coming then into relationship leads to premature ejaculation. And premature ejaculation can be defined as a man does not last long enough for his partner to reach the levels of satisfaction and pleasure that she would like or that he would like her to have. Premature ejaculation doesn't need to be defined just as the really classic 5 second to 30-second spontaneous ejaculation that's totally uncontrolled. It's just a repeated pattern of not lasting as long as you would like or as long as is necessary for your partner to feel the level of fulfillment that she's capable of and that she's looking for. So, acknowledging that these patterns are at work and that initial habit of self regulation and self soothing through porn and masturbation does not mean that there's something wrong with you. It does not mean that you're morally flawed. It's just a habit that you learned at
Mm-hmm.
some point in life. And it's a regulation tool, and we all need regulation tools. And
Mm-hmm.
so, dropping any shame or guilt associated with that and just objectively looking at it for what it is. This is a pattern that's creating other patterns in my life that are not empowering. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I see the root cause of sexual disempowerment for men, which leads to scarcity around sexuality, as being um, misinformed, maladapted mechanisms for self pleasuring and self soothing, and then a desire gap in relationships where a man wants sex more than his partner.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd love to just double click on one of the pieces you brought there around women can often feel used when a man is unconsciously using her for his lack of self-regulation, or for trying to escape stress. Like, a lot of guys use sex and porn as just a way to get off from your stress, or a way to dissociate, or a way to feel something because maybe you're numb all the time. And it's just worth mentioning here. We talk a lot in this work about, women are such amazing mirrors and like oracles, if you will, for us. And you better believe that she can feel where you're coming from. There's this saying in the Tao that law is governed by intention. If your intentions sexually approaching your partner are coming from this grabby energy, this, which is what we would call scarcity, like you're trying to fill this empty cup, you're trying to make her your source of pleasure and sexual satisfaction, that is going to be draining and depleting the relationship and draining and depleting your partner. Instead, if you are coming from a place of internal fulfillment and filling your cup, as we like to say in the work, and this is what we're going to be getting into in this conversation, when you're coming from sexual abundance and well-being and self-leadership, that's when you can actually be giving in relationship instead of just getting. And this is when the feminine, when our female partners can actually begin to be met in sexual fulfillment and sexual union, and they actually can start desiring this connection with us because we're not just taking from her all the time. So with that, I'd love to turn it back to you, Hawks, and hear a little bit about where a man can start filling his own cup so that he can show up in this abundance rather than scarcity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I want to describe a really simple 3-step process for men to reclaim our sexual empowerment, to reclaim our sexual power, to become empowered through abundance rather than scarcity. And so we'll break this down. Step 1, containment. And I'll explain what that means. Step 2, solo practice. So how do we work with ourselves, with our own bodies, to regulate and to also fill our cup sexually and to also build our sexual skill and ability and capacity up to then move into step 3, which is partner practice. How do we show up in relationship so that that desire gap dissolves or it inverts and our partner actually wants us, more often, more frequently, more deeply than we might even be able to meet her in? Because when that desire gap shifts or equalizes, it's going to create a great deal of empowerment, not just for the man, but for the relationship in general. So 3 steps: containment, solo practice, partner practice, and that will take us from scarcity to abundance. I want to speak just a little bit more about this scarcity loop and just name really clearly like how it shows up and how it proliferates. So that example that I gave at the beginning of the man feeling stress in his life and wanting to calm himself down, that can be like the start of this loop. And he's then turning to a release, an ejaculation, either with himself through porn or some other means of self-pleasuring, or looking outside of himself to a partner. The other trigger for this is just desire. A man maybe he's not feeling stress. He's feeling really good. He's lit up. He had an awesome day and he's just desiring his partner. That's beautiful. And if he's not met, if his partner isn't in a place where she's ready to meet him in that desire, then it's also going to create this scarcity loop. So looking at a man feels stress or he feels desire, and then he's seeking a release, and then he ejaculates, and then the nervous system drops down. He feels, often we hear from men in that situation, if they're using something like porn, he feels like he used himself in a way. It's not often for men who feel called to this path of a higher sexual, awakening, to use porn in that way and then actually feel good about it after. So then it creates this sense of scarcity within self, like, why did I do that? Or if he's seeking with his partner and there's some quick sex that leads to his ejaculation, then his partner ends up feeling used or unseen. And then that leads to this desire gap widening. His partner might feel like she was rushed and she wasn't met where she wanted to be. She was penetrated, but not actually really filled up in the ways that are important for her. And then this leads to the man feeling rejected, because as that desire gap widens, she's going to say no more often, more and more often, especially over a number of years or decades. And then the man ends up feeling rejected. And then that creates this deeper feeling of scarcity within the self. So again, this isn't moral failure. This is just conditioning. It's the reality that if you're living in, now having a higher level of awareness around it, we can start to repattern it. We don't need to dwell in guilt or shame. It's just about choosing what's a more appropriate way to meet these stimuli when they come up. So speaking to that stress or desire, we bring in stage 1 of this process, containment. And so containment is not about suppression. If we think about it with desire, it's not to say that your desire is wrong, but let's look at ways that we can sit with that desire or that arousal without discharging it right away. And that's a level of containment. And it's a really masculine quality to be able to increase our containment, whether it's through our sexual expression, whether it's through our emotional expression. Again, it's not about suppressing, but it's about having a level of containment where we're grounded and we're regulated and we can feel what's there to feel, but it's not causing a reaction that's unconscious from us, where we're reaching for porn without, even though part of us knows that's not what I want to do, or we're seeking to take from our partner, as in you got to pleasure me right now, you got to please me right now, I want to fuck, or emotionally just having an outburst. It's that's uncontained emotional energy. There are healthy ways to express and unhealthy ways So creating containment, and just real simply, when it comes to our sexual containment as men, this is where a practice like semen intention comes in, or semen retention, as it's popularly known. If you haven't before, just try going 7 days without ejaculating. It's just a simple place to start. And it's possible. And if you haven't done it before, or if it feels edgy for you, it's likely to bring some stuff up. It's going to require you to sit with that desire, to sit with that arousal when it shows up, and regulate yourself in some other way. And so this is, there are complexities to this process, and that's why we have the systems in place in our program that allow us to replace that old pattern with something new that's going to serve the same role. But without going into all of the depth of that, just understanding that if you were previously using porn or ejaculation as a self-soothing regulation practice, then it's going to be really important that you bring something else in to take that place. So breathing, meditating, going for a walk, going to the gym, whatever it is that's for you to decide in this format. If you're receiving this information in this format, if you join our program, we have lots of tools and practices that work very effectively to take that place. But just understanding the first step is containment. If we're reacting and acting on every impulse of desire or every stimulus of stress that we experience, then we don't have containment. And the first step is patching up those leaks where we used to act unconsciously. Mm-hmm. Is there anything you want to add to that, Ben, before we move on to the solo practice part of this journey?
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning here that, in the traditional Chinese medicine approach to sexual life force energy, as it's called, the nature of sexual energy is taught to bind and amplify. It's going to be turning up the volume knob on whatever's going on internally. So if you're in a state of cognitive dissonance, if you're in a lot of disempowering patterns and how you're showing up in your day-to-day life, it's going to amplify those. If you're showing up in a lot of structured, grounded, focused energy and coherence, you could say, it's going to amplify that. It's going to amplify your meditation, or it's going to amplify your depression, whatever's going on. So that's why it is really important, and that's, Hawks was mentioning briefly, there's a lot of nuance to this. This is a really deep personal development journey that you're going on as you begin to practice holding your sexual energy, but you can trust it's going to be amplifying how you show up as a man and bringing more depth to you. So that's really what this containment is about. And that's why a lot of times having the support of brotherhood, and coaches in the space as you're undergoing the shedding processes that can come up can be really important. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add to that. But I know we're going to be getting into the next step here, which is solo cultivation, right, Hawks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So solo cultivation is it's what we call the reframing of a self-pleasure practice, because sexual energy is flowing through us all of the time, and we are sexual beings, and it's important for us to have a space where we can honor that energy. And if traditionally that space for you as an individual, like alone, has been porn and like this word masturbation, which literally means to defile with the hand, that's an energy that we're going to be really well served to remove from our life. But again, as we mentioned, just pushing something out without bringing something new in is going to create a vacuum, and something will inevitably come to fill that void. And if we're not intentional about what that is, then something else that is also possibly not serving us, or could be, even worse for us than what we were removing, could come in. So solo cultivation, this is the solo practice part of this journey of moving from scarcity to abundance with our sexuality. Solo cultivation is quite simply the healthy way to honor our sexual energy and to bring pleasure and arousal to our systems
To fill
individually,
our cups.
to fill our own cup.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some core rules here, which I'll name. There's no porn. There's no external imagery or stimulus involved. This is just about us being with ourselves. We slow the breath down and we become aware of the patterns of breathing and the posture of the body. You know, it's really common if you're jerking off or masturbating in this old way to have the body start to cave in on itself and contract. And it's super common for the breath to start becoming more shallow, coming into the chest rather than down into the belly and pelvic floor. And that breath is very likely speeding up and accelerating as you approach that peak of arousal that leads to ejaculation. So we're repatterning our physical responses to arousal by slowing the breath down, by bringing it deep into the body, breathing into the pelvic floor, which is amazing for opening up our sex organs and for opening up sexual energy circulation in our body. And it feels good. It's functional breathing, but it's a way of breathing that many of us have moved away from throughout experiences in our life unconsciously. And this is an opportunity to repattern that. So, not using porn or external stimulus, slowing the breath down, staying present in the body, feeling the sensations in the body, not just the sensation of an ejaculation, but all of the subtle experiences of pleasure and sensation in the body that are happening all of the time. Is bringing more awareness to that. And then a really important part of the solo cultivation practice is we're going to stop and we're going to come to a place of completion before ejaculating. So there isn't an ejaculation during a solo cultivation practice, which is one of the really big differences between traditional masturbation and solo cultivation. And we use the word cultivation because we are cultivating sexual energy. And then we are storing it in our body to fuel us through our life rather than building sexual energy and releasing it in an ejaculation, which is wonderful and great some of the time. You know, we're not in the camp that ejaculation is inherently bad or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We believe that there are harmonious periods between ejaculation, and most of the time we're actually going to be better served as men to learn how to cultivate and store that energy to fuel us in other aspects of our life. So learning to calm ourselves down, to down regulate after that buildup of arousal without the traditional finishing part of ejaculation. And all of these aspects are like they create a situation that is so nourishing for all of the different parts of our human experience, like far beyond the bedroom. The tools and the skills that we develop in a solo cultivation practice allow us to move through the world stronger, more grounded, more regulated, more sovereign, more confident, more empowered, and more energized.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that must be experienced to really understand. Because I can empathize with any men out there listening who have not gone into a practice like this and really given it the time required to understand what the benefits are. You might be thinking, like, that sounds ridiculous. Why would I want to do that? But every single time that men come through our program and they engage with this practice earnestly, there is a resounding positive experience that's felt that then starts to shift the belief that, oh, I need to ejaculate every time that I experience arousal. That shift, that belief is a story that we've been told or that we've come to believe through our own personal experience, and we can rewrite that story. And it's an empowering story to rewrite, because when we're not requiring ejaculation to feel sexually fulfilled, we no longer require our partner or porn or masturbation to be a self-soothing, regulating practice for us. We can actually learn to open up to the process of sexual experience, to the process of arousal, rather than just fixating on the outcome of it, which for
Mhm.
many men is always being an ejaculation. So that's a, the high level breakdown of the solo cultivation practice. Again, we lay this out in a clear step-by-step process. Um, if you're really looking for a deeper, level of guidance in that, but with what I've shared there, any man can start to repattern his own sexual response at home and bring more
Mhm.
empowerment into the ways that he relates with his sex on his own. This is the path for us to separate orgasm from ejaculation, which again, if you haven't heard of that or if you haven't experienced it, it might sound pretty far out. But this is possible. We can experience orgasmic states of pleasure and bliss without an ejaculation happening simultaneously. There is an orgasm that happens when we have an ejaculation. That will happen simultaneously, but we can also have an orgasm without ejaculation. And so that again starts to bring more empowerment to us where, oh, I can experience this thing that I love that makes me feel so good and raises my vibration, but it doesn't require me to deplete myself by having an ejaculation, which we've gone into in previous podcasts. Just the physical and energetic depletion that comes from unharmonious ejaculation periods. But without going into
Mhm.
that, just understanding that yeah, there's a lot there for us when we separate orgasm from ejaculation.
Yeah, I'd love to hop in here and add to this that this is also how we train for the bedroom.
Mm.
This is like training for game day. If game day is with your partner, when we talk about premature ejaculation or erectile challenges and things like that, getting into these states and rewiring our nervous system response, which is what's at the core of this, because an ejaculation is a sympathetic clenching response. We're practicing going into this parasympathetic. We're practicing opening and relaxing and releasing. And there's a whole bunch of different tools, and this is a lot of what's in the training to also move and distribute that sexual energy. But as we practice this more and more, it's going to allow you to show up with holding more capacity for pleasure, for sexual energy in your body, for orgasm without leading to an ejaculation. And that's what's underneath this whole path of separating orgasm and ejaculation. So it's worth mentioning that. I mean, there's so many different benefits to this. One thing I do want to mention before we move on with the solo cultivation practice for guys who are also getting started, this is another disclaimer, is that, blue balls would be something that you would expect if you're a man who's new to this work. Like if you just go into this clenching and using the old patterns and trying to jerk one out and building up your energy right up to the edge and then suddenly try to stop, it can be really painful, and blue balls is a symptom of the energy not being moved. It's being pressurized and just held in the genitals. And so there's a whole lot of different practices. Again, a lot of this is in our training that help us move the energy. We just covered the microcosmic orbit in our last podcast. If you want to listen to that, that's a really powerful tool. There's many, many different tools. But the biggest thing I just say is, if you're getting started in this, is stay at a 7 or an 8 out of 10. Like if a 10 is the point of no return towards an ejaculatory orgasm, don't go up to an 8 or a 9. Keep it at a simmer, keep it at a 7 or 8. They say 7 or 8 is just great in these practices. And then practice letting off the gas a little bit. Practice tuning more into the subtle sensations. Don't just stroke your cock hard and fast like you always have. Try out some different techniques, lots of oil, touching your body in different places. And this will help slow the buildup of energy. And if you're staying deep in your breath and staying really relaxed, this is just one of the ways you can get started with just a baseline practice. Again, there's a whole lot more to go a whole lot deeper than we can give in this. And that's why there's like 60 hours of content in our course. But I just wanted to add those additional pieces in, Hawks, before we move ahead. Is there anything else you want to place in there?
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you speaking to the, practice how we play aspect of this is skill training for the bedroom. It's so many things. It's neuroplasticity, it's nervous system
Mhm.
regulation training, and it's skill training for how we show up in partnership, how we show up in sexual penetration with our partner. Like if you're training for a marathon and you're only running, mile long races or mile long, sets every day, or if you're training for a 10-mile race and you're just actually at the track running sprints every day, like you're not going to set yourself up for success. And so think about practicing how we play, and let this solo practice be, and it just serves in this way to actually help us to make love to our partners in ways that are deeply fulfilling and nourishing for them. And it starts by learning how to make love with ourselves.
Yeah, and this also allows us to show up. Again, this is filling our cup, and this allows us to feel so sexually fulfilled that we can actually show up in partnership with desire, but with a level of equanimity and detachment from outcome because we are filling our own cup. So, yeah, with this in place, we can move into relationship, right, Hawks?
Yeah. So partner practice, repatterning in relationships. So the shift here comes from the extracting, that taking energy that you were speaking to earlier, Ben, which is pretty inevitable if we're always showing up from a place of emptiness or a place of lack or scarcity in ourselves. So shifting that extracting energy to a giving energy, actually looking at how can I give to my partner. And this is one of the marvelous miracles of life, is that when we give, we actually receive. And the more that we give, the more that we receive. And it starts first from giving. And I often will draw this relationship to gardening when it comes to giving to the feminine. When we give to the feminine, if we're thinking about, the gardening analogy, the feminine being Mother Earth, the earth that we're cultivating to grow a garden. Springtime comes around and we put in work. We put in work to turn the soil, to sow the seeds, to water it, to give it that attention and nurturing. And then over time, summer and fall come around and that garden gives back to us tenfold. There's abundance because we've given first. And so that is also true in relationship between men and women, in my experience. We as men can give to our partners. And when we give to our partners, they will inevitably return that energy to us twofold, fivefold, tenfold. It's so beautiful. And so removing our need, that's what the containment and what the solo practice and solo cultivation steps are about. It's being able to show up in relationship, not with that extraction energy, but actually instead, like, how can I give to you? So first of all, like removing penetration as the default goal. Let's look at how we can show up intimately and sexually or sensually with our partner, but actually without even penetrating using our cock. And so there's a lot of different ways that we can do this, through sensual massage, through using our hands, using our tongue and our mouth. Oral sex is amazing. And if we really just give ourselves to our partner, it's only a matter of time until that desire gap starts to shift and she'll want to give back to you as well. And rather from a place of like transaction, she might currently, if there's a desire gap, she might give to you sexually, but it's coming from a transactional place. Like she's like, okay, well, let me just satisfy him so he shuts up, or so he'll do these things for me. Or because she's like, she wants to satisfy her partner. And so she's giving to him, but it's not from a place of really receiving. And all of that is going to over time just exacerbate the desire gap. So removing penetration as the default goal is an important first step in this. And then the next step is, when there is penetration, removing ejaculation as the default endpoint, or the default, considering the sexual act completed. That's another aspect of, porn conditioning, is it's always ends in the man ejaculating. And that's a belief and a story that we have many of us have learned as men that the sexual act is completed when the man ejaculates. And through the practice of solo cultivation, we can start to understand that no, there can be a really fulfilling sense of completion, regardless of whether I've ejaculated or not. So, removing penetration as the default goal, removing ejaculation as the felt experience of completion, and then really focusing on her arousal arc. And so this is where becoming a skillful, attuned lover is incredibly important. Understanding that female sexual response is different than male sexual response. And it's our responsibility as men to understand what actually really makes her light up, what brings fulfillment, and what allows her to go through her orgasmic arc, her arc of arousal and fulfillment. And it's likely going to be a little different than our learned, habituated arc of arousal. And so, just really practically, one thing I would invite men into if they're looking to repattern their relationship sexually and be in a partner practice that's going to create abundance and empowerment is to spend 30 minutes on your partner's pleasure. And the emphasis there is on her pleasure, not yours. And 30 minutes might seem like a lot for some men, or 30 minutes might seem impossible for some men if you're thinking about that's penetrative sex. Because I understand that lasting 30 minutes is not a realistic starting point for many men when it comes to penetrative sex. And that's okay, because we don't have to use our cock to bring her pleasure. So in this new approach, spend 30 minutes only on her pleasure, using your hands, using your tongue, using your words, using your energy. And if it's possible for you, then you can use your cock too. But remember, you're thinking about this is for her pleasure and you're orienting to that. And if you're getting too aroused and too excited to last that long, then it's not time for you to actually be in the penetrative sex. And so removing the agenda, creating this environment where there is no rush and there's no pressure. And that's important as well for if we're approaching it as like, okay, I'm going to spend 30 minutes on her pleasure. That's not, okay, she has 30 minutes to have an orgasm. It's just 30 minutes of giving her pleasure for the sake of pleasure. So remove the agenda, remove any pressure of an orgasm. If it happens, great. If it doesn't, that's great too, because her cup is still being filled as she gets to just receive that from you. So that's, one place that I would strongly urge men to start if there's a clear desire gap in your relationship is make the point of weekly spending 30 minutes only on her pleasure and just see how that will start to shift things. And then as you're working with your own solo practice and solo cultivation, you're going to be developing your skills to eventually build up to a place where there could be 30 minutes or more of penetrative sex, and it can still be focusing on her pleasure. And you can also still be experiencing immense pleasure yourself. And I just really want to emphasize this energy of giving that we as men are incredibly well served and well suited to step into, and just explore how that might shift some of those dynamics in relationship. So, Step 1, containment. Go 7 days without ejaculating if you haven't done that before. Build up that ability and that increased capacity to be with your arousal, to be with your desire, and to self-regulate stressors as they come up using tools that it is not just ejaculation. And then develop a solo practice, a solo cultivation practice, and self-regulation practices that will allow you to then develop that nervous system training and also develop the skill to show up intimately with your partner and to fill your own cup with sexual fulfillment. And then you can take it into partnership and go into a partner practice where you're just giving for the sake of her pleasure.
Yeah.
And all
Amen.
of that will serve to allow us to shift from sexual scarcity to sexual abundance. And when we're in that place of sexual abundance, we experience empowerment as men. And it's the place of scarcity that creates disempowerment. Because if we're always looking outside of us, then that means that we're not actually in our power. We're beholden to someone else. And bringing that empowerment into ourselves is crucial for our well-being and for the well-being of our relationships. And it's a fucking great place to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said, Hawks. And yeah, I know we have just a couple minutes here remaining, and just wanted to double click on one last piece, or just highlight one additional piece with partner practice. It's worth mentioning that having a foundation of stability in your relationship outside of the bedroom and emotional safety, just safety in general, when we talk about having a foundation of intimacy, is vital. And ensuring that communication is clear, there's no withholding of charges or resentments against each other, ensuring that there's a deeply trusting, communicative, coherent relationship as a foundation is a necessary part of this as well. And for a lot of men, there can be, you may not think that you saying you're going to take out the trash and you not doing it, a number of times, is going to affect how much your partner opens to you in the bedroom, but I can promise you it does. So we've mentioned this before in other podcasts, and another big part of this training is a practice we call clearing the glass, which is essentially opening a space with your partner once a week is what we recommend, to ask the question, is there anything standing in the way of deeper intimacy and trust between us? And allowing that space to be cleared would be another recommendation I would give for any brother who's really looking to reset his relationship as well, on top of bringing filling our own cup and containing our energy and bringing this leadership. So I just wanted to sprinkle that in there. And as we wrap up, Hawks, is there any last things you want to say just about this process of moving from sexual scarcity to sexual empowerment, and how we can step into this abundance as men?
Yeah, well, let's just like paint a little vision to close it out, and feel into if these feel like they are, your lived experience and you're fully embodied in these things. And if not, just try it on. Be like, how would this feel? As a sexually empowered man is not desperate. So if you feel like there's an energy of desperation for you when it comes to sex, think about using some of these tools we've provided to let that go, because it's not the energy of empowered to be desperate. And sexually empowered man is also not reactive, and that's creating this containment, the space between the stimulus and then our response rather than our reaction. And so a sexually empowered man can give and can last. And so again, if you're not at that place of being able to last as long as you'd like, just know that there are tools and practices that we can do to develop this skill. And the ability to give generously is something that we all have. It just requires our willingness to really tap into it and to create that environment, as you were speaking to, Ben, where there's enough trust in the relationship that our partner is willing and ready to receive from us, because it does require a level of surrender from the woman to be able to really receive from her man. So it's not necessarily enough to just be like, okay, I'm just going to give to you sexually and fill your cup with my tongue and bring you so much pleasure. It's like, well, great if she's actually ready to receive that. But if she's not, then you're going to need to take a few steps back and just actually give by creating trust and coherence in the relationship. And so, the ability to hold intensity and to not collapse. These are all aspects of a sexually empowered man. And a sexually fulfilled woman is going to feel seen. She's going to feel heard. She's going to feel deep arousal in her system. She's going to initiate more. Like, how great would that feel? If you're a man who's been in this desire gap and you're always the one initiating sex, how great would it feel for your sexually fulfilled woman to actually be the one initiating sex with you? We all want to feel desired. We all want to feel, that level of want from our partner. And so when we really build our capacity to sexually fulfill our partners, then they're going to initiate more. And she's going to trust your presence, trust your intention. So all of this is going to allow us in partnership to shift from like sex as a bargaining tool to sex as a bonding tool, which is really how it's meant to be in relationships. This is our most profound bonding experience. The hormones that are released during sex, the level of intimacy and connection is so sacred. And so let's allow the sex to be bonding rather than bargaining. So, yeah, when you give instead of extracting, you create abundance. And that's going to start by giving to yourself and then giving to your partner. And that's what I got for us on this little journey of sexual empowerment. Anything else you want to add in, brother?
I think that covered it all, and just wanted to thank the listeners for tuning in, and thank the men in our training program and the Brotherhood for making this podcast possible. We really appreciate you guys joining us in this journey of empowering one another, of aligning our sexual energy, of moving from sexual scarcity, from the extractive, ancestral relationship with the feminine, to one of giving, to one of abundance, to filling our own cup, and stepping into the men we came here to be, ultimately. So, yeah, with that, we'll sign off here, but sending lots of love to you all, and we'll see you on the next one.
All right, let's go.